Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Pathak. I'm 28 years old and I'm a property developer. That's quite a corny introduction, actually. That sounds like something out of Take Me Out. I'm not sure if anyone's seen that. But before I start, I'd just like to thank Matthew SIddell and the rest of the team at Quorum for hosting this fabulous event. I met Matt a few weeks back, and as soon as he told me about the opportunity to speak, and in fact, about what Quorum is about, I thought it was a fantastic opportunity to meet like-minded people. So it's a pleasure to be here today. And thank you for the great turnout, because I know it's been snowing, and that normally puts London at a standstill. So it's great to see so many people. So I'll start by talking about my education and early career, and then about a career crossroads that I had quite early on, actually, into my career. I'll talk through some of my past projects that I've had, and then a change of model, which I encountered probably about a couple of years back, and what the reason was for that. And then talk through some of my current projects that I've got currently in build, some of the things that I've got in the pipeline. And then I'll round off by talking about the birth of my brand, my baby, Mountbatten Homes, and what my future plans are, and the key people who are part of those plans. So I started my career at the LSE, which is not too far away from here. It's in Holborn, and LSE boasts an incredibly beautiful library. Looks like this. I spent about 5% of my time there, and about 95% of my time here, which is why I just about scraped my 2-1 in business, maths, and stats. I then left after graduating and worked for a company called Cognizant Technology Solutions, which is a IT company based in Canary Wharf. Had a fabulous time there. So a lot of the guys there were from India, and I'm born and bred in London, but my parents are from India, so they saw me as the best of both, Hovis bred. So I was very lucky to be elevated to this position where I was working with a lot of senior management. So I was going out 2-3 times a week to the Hackersans and the Rokers of the world, having a fabulous time, until my dad one day said, son, come here. This is ridiculous. You're coming back every day pissed. This is a long-term recipe for disaster. So he made me quit my job, unfortunately, and that was the time where I had to make a decision. My father's a McDonald's franchisee. He's the largest one in the country with 31 restaurants and growing. And he had a couple of property investments that he had made at that time, which he hadn't done anything with. He had a couple of buy-to-let investments, and he had one site which had planning for 6 units. And he said, look, you can join the business or you can do something of your own. So I said, look, I really want to go into property, because where McDonald's is a very black and white business. You walk in, the brand attracts the customer, operationally everything is set from beforehand. And I thought I can't really add my mark. I can't make a McNummin burger, so you're restricted to that degree. So that innovation for me wasn't there at that age. So I thought, and if you look at the transaction in general, people are buying a Big Mac for £4 over the counter. It's a very straightforward transaction, whereas property is completely different. Once you go into a project, you really don't know how you're going to come out on the other end. Even if we talk about construction costs, I've met a few builders here today, construction costs vary from £150 a square foot to £250 a square foot for new builds. So how do you know who to pick, what to pick, and all the challenges that come with it? So I wanted to start from the ground up. I didn't want to be the guy who just borrowed money off his dad and started his own business. So I started my own estate agency to really understand the trade. So that included everything from cold calling, although I wasn't as happy as this chap on screen, door-to-door sales and being told to F off every second day, and leaflet dropping. And it was a brutal experience. And, there were times when I thought, bloody hell, I went to LSE and here I am door knocking. And I set up that in Ealing Broadway. And within a quarter-mile radius, we had 72 agents. So a highly competitive market, very, dog-eat-dog industry. But taught me a great deal. Obviously, the lettings and sales I learned, which was extremely useful, but also vendor management and other tricks of the trades. And I also learned about what actually sells. So being an agent myself, I can appreciate what kind of stock rents, what kind of stock sells, what are the things that buyers and renters look for. Is it ceiling height? Is it open plan living space, etc.? I also, because I didn't have enough on my plate, started a recruitment consultancy. So this was a chap that I had met from Cognizant at that time, who introduced me to someone who was a former head of HR at one of the tier 2 banks. And we went to a pub. I think we were 3 or 4 pints down, and he said, well, this is a problem that they're having with various agents. And I said, look, it's the same principle. Where you're looking at a buyer and a seller and marrying the two together, you're looking at the same thing. So you've got somebody who is looking to hire, and you're looking at somebody who's got, who's looking for a job. So you just marry the two together. So I said, if you think it's that easy, big man, why don't you set up one yourself? So I think it was 4 or 5 pints down at that time. So I said, yeah, no problem. So I did. And every time I finished my agency from about 6:30 to 8:39, I started calling candidates and closed a couple of roles. So I said, oh, bloody hell, this is good money. But that time, my time was being stretched. I'd started working on that site that my father gave me to look after, which had planning for 6 units. And obviously I had the estate agency. But fortunately, one of my colleagues was looking for a career change, and he, joined hands with me, and we now supply a number of banks with personnel, but we also started on the construction side, which has been very useful for me personally, because procurement on my sites is one thing, but then understanding labour, and I had a discussion with a few of the people here today. I can understand the cost of a brickie is now north of £220 a day. And a lot of developers don't know these things because they're normally just signing a JCT D&B and letting the builder crack on with it. So I really wanted to understand the inherent cost of every single part of the process. And this was my model. So I thought, this is a bit difficult, I'll stick to this screen. So I thought, on the front end, I've got my agency which can help me procure stock, get good sites. I've got build a relationship with various agents in the area. And on the back end, once it's developed, I can either sell or rent my stock. And then I've got the recruitment element, which is providing me with personnel and labour, whether it's a bricklayer, a scaffold erector, a ground worker, a painter or a decorator. So for me, what is a very capital-intensive business, which is what property is, I'm churning some liquidity in my recruitment and in my agency. So that was the way I envisioned the model to be. This was one of my first projects. I touched on this earlier. So I took from my father this site that he had done nothing with, and I applied for planning for 2 more flats in the basement. We eventually got it, and I'm sure a lot of people here know how difficult it is working with councils. So that in itself took over 12 months. And the build was 14 months, and I'm not going to bore you with all the numbers there, but in general it was a very healthy return on equity. We were fortunate that the market at that time was peaking. I think from 2012 to 2015 was a really golden time to be involved in London property. I look at this project as my baby, because this was the first one that I did completely by myself. In terms of a new build, there were others that I'll talk about a bit later on that we had the JV partner involved in. But for me, this one was very special. There are my parents there, you can see, laying the first brick on the site. So this is something I hold very close to my heart. Again, just some pictures of the external internals. That's not my Porsche, by the way. It's one of our tenants. This is a second site in West Ealing. Again, I won't bore you a great deal, but we like places on the Crossrail. This is about a 4-minute walk from Crossrail Station, West Ealing, which I believe Crossrail will come in within the next year. That's what they say anyway. And you'll be in Bond Street in a matter of, I think, 15 or 16 minutes. So I still think that there's room in that market where you've got Crossrail. So if anybody's got any investments in Crossrail, although a lot of the price has been factored in already, I think there will be another kicker once it actually comes into full force, because people don't actually realise the benefit until it's actually there. So do watch this space. Again, for us, it was a fantastic project. We purchased the site with planning for 9 flats, achieved 13 flats in the end by reapplying for planning. Took us a couple of years to build. It's a bit of an awkward site in terms of access. It was on a main road, so road closures and things like that. But again, great learning experience for me, and all the things that projects throw up. But then I had a change of strategy. My dad said to me, look, I want to keep a lot of this stock. We'll refinance on a buy-to-let. But what I said to him is, look, whilst you might have that long-term view, and in general, if you look at London property prices from probably the 1920s to now, property prices in London double every 10 years, more or less. But I said, look, Dad, I want to do 100 units next year, 200 the year after, and build a pipeline of 1,000. And I can't do that if we keep all of our stock, because you're building all these projects, you refinance on 65, 60 or 65% LTV, and your profit is held in the asset. So it doesn't allow you to expand to do bigger and better projects. And that was really what I wanted to do. And if you look at the market in general, and I'm sure this will, raise a few eyebrows, but in my personal opinion, I think that capital growth is fairly stagnant. If you look at the forecast for the next few years, okay, Crossrail might be a little bit of an exception, but I don't see a great deal of change in capital forecasts. Again, rent forecasts are also fairly slow. So, for me, churning stock, developing stock, not to retain but to sell, is very important. So we finally reached an agreement, and I said, look, you go your way, I go my way. So we are the best of competitors at the moment. So he runs his McDonalds and I do this independently. And one of the things that I've started realizing is the days of buying good projects with planning have gone. Everybody's become far too greedy. So you really have to take a calculated and educated guess. You're either buying completely unconditional, or you're buying with partial planning and then improving on that planning to make your ROEs more effective. So this is the structure that I now employ for a lot of my developments. This is the general structure. So as you'll see, I'll always co-invest with all my investors. I'll put up 20% of the equity requirement and I'll raise the remaining 80. My 20 will represent 30% shareholding in the project, and so I get a 10% promote, and the investors own the remaining 70. All the money comes into Holdco, so everything is completely transparent. It comes into Holdco, which is where the equity comes in. It's lent to the development company, which is the one which raises the debt and owns the asset. The idea, once we sell this stock, is that we liquidate development company at this level, and then raise it up to the Holdco and then distribute the dividends accordingly. What I do with my investors, it's almost like a developer bonus. Anything above 20% gross return on equity, and the average investor is getting more than 100% gross return on equity in our projects, we get an additional 20%. Like I said, it's more like a developer bonus, but we are very much aligned to make the most money in that project. The other things that are very important in this, investors love the fact that we co-invest in projects. We put our money where our mouth is. The debt, again, we raise the debt. We do everything turnkey, from the construction through to the procurement, through to building out the site, through to the sale process, the marketing, everything. On top of that, they have security because we have a waterfall payback structure. I don't want any project to make a loss, but God forbid if a project were to make a loss, then we pay bank debt back first and other suppliers. Then investors get their initial equity first, then I get my equity. So I would be the first loss bearer in that situation. This is a project that we bought last year, and we've successfully obtained planning for 9 units. Bought the site with planning for 2 units. We've now got planning for approximately 7,000 square foot across 2 buildings. Again, Crossrail impacted, so we love Crossrail. It's a 6-7 minute walk from Hanwell Station in a fabulous location. We picked it up for $1 million. Our all-in cost is roughly about 2.9 million. And we've just had an appraisal by Colliers, who are going to be selling the site for us with a GDB of 4.7 million. Again, we don't like being greedy, so we're selling off plan at probably a blended average of about £650, £660 a square foot. Whereas a lot of developers would look at getting 700, 720. For me, I'd rather turn my stock quicker, because if I'm waiting, let's just say I build the site out in a year's time, and I'm waiting a further 9 months to sell those for £700 a square foot, the actual return on equity, if you analyse it, is a lot less. So the key is not to be greedy, is looking at churning stock and being realistic with your end values and giving the return to the investor. This is just a render of the back building. Renders are currently being done, so I will share a brochure at some point over the next coming few weeks. This is another site in Camberley. This is in the heart of Camberley town centre. So the things that we really look at when we're looking at any project, we're looking at what is the public transport like in terms of the access to London. How quickly do you get to central London in? Second thing we look at is, what are the schools like in the local area? We are building stock not for some foreign buyer to come and buy the whole lot off us. We've got to look at what the market is that we'll be very fortunate if somebody comes and buys the whole lot off, but we've got to factor in the stock for the local market. So schools, local amenities. So for us, this ticked all the boxes. 16 units above approximately about 6,000 square foot of commercial. Again, we bought this with outline planning, so the return on equity is not as good as the other project, but obviously if you weigh up the risk and reward, it's far less than purchasing into the Hanwell project, which had the element of risk associated with the planning. And this is probably something, this is the third project that we're going in to build currently in this quarter. Now this project slightly bucks the trend for me, because I wouldn't consider a £1.5 million house as bread and butter stock. But for me, it's still £600 a square foot end value that we're looking at achieving. And I think that the market is very strong for the owner occupiers at this stage. Buy-to-let market has been crippled because of the changes in the taxation regulation. So interest is now non-tax deductible. I think it's been a year now. I think we've got interest rate rise probably forecast for the end of this year. And in general, yields are very low for buy-to-let investors. So that market has almost been crippled. And on top of that, if you add on top of that the stamp duty hike, it's just the buy-to-let market has suffered a great deal. So we are looking primarily at sites which are for the local area. So this is Fry and Barnet. I'm not sure how many of you know the area, but it's a beautiful area. It's actually on Fry and Barnet Lane. So same place as where Middlesex Golf Club is. We've got Friary Park. If I've got any buyers in the room, please come and reach out to me after. But this is a project that I'm really excited about. This is something where we can really put our own personal touch on. Each house is about 2,700 square foot of living space over 4 floors, including 5 bedrooms and a cinema room. And this is the render for it. Again, we're preparing a marketing pack for this as we speak as well. And we've just broken ground on this actually as of a week ago. So this is a very exciting time. So I just want to talk about some of the challenges that I face as a developer and how I do my best to sort of counteract them. One of the biggest challenges is planning. And I've worked with some fantastic councils as well. Barnet Council in particular was fabulous. If you've ever got any work in Barnet, you can actually pay them a certain amount of money to actually get your conditions discharged early. Compare that to other councils. I won't name the councils. I might need to work with them in future. But it's really difficult. Councils are completely stretched at the moment. They're lacking in staff and resources, and it's very, very difficult. So my only advice really would be is to work alongside them as much as possible, not against them. So, in our one in Hanwell, if you look at that site, and it's on a very busy road, it's the Uxbridge Road. It's a very narrow site, and we really maximised the usage on that site. And that's only because we went to the council 3 or 4 times, and even after that we were sending them emails. So they really have, it was a very collaborative working approach. It's something I'd encourage all developers to do, as opposed to saying, this is what I believe and this is the principle of X, Y, Z, because you're only going to encounter problem after problem. Councils is one thing, but then also the political landscape is another. So you really have to be wary of that. Party wars concerns, again, this is not a planning issue, more a legal issue. My advice would be, make them your friends, go around with a box of chocolates, go around with a bottle of wine, be friendly with them, because you want to integrate as part of that community, not be like we're the brash developers who have come here and are doing this building. The rising cost of construction. This is a very difficult one to deal with at the moment, because the cost of materials is going up, the cost of labour is going through the roof. What's going to happen with Brexit and the impact that's going to have on labour is another huge concern for a lot of developers and construction firms. But the idea is to work smart, so you don't necessarily have to look at traditional building forms. You may want to consider things like cross-laminated timber construction. Again, I won't bore you with all these complex building forms, but there are different ways to achieve the same result. And that leads me on quite nicely to my next point, which is exploring new methods of construction. So building the way we build a house now has not changed for the last 100 years. people are still building block and brick buildings, despite new methods coming in. And I think we're probably the only industry which has not taken on a different method to 100 years ago. So I've just mentioned this before as well. Cross-laminated timber is one of the considerations we're making on one of our sites at the moment. I think it's, it cuts time. So if I did a traditional build, that would be 5 or 6 months to do the superstructure. Cross-laminated timber would be 3 weeks. So I might be paying a 20% premium on that. But if I factor in the return on equity to my investors, if I factor in the deliverability of the project, if I factor in everything, then really actually it's a net saving on interest and so on. But I think it's an educational process because not everybody understands that. And I'm talking about buyers, insurance companies, banks, and it'll be interesting to hear from some of the finance guys later about what their thoughts are on things like this. And then finding sites. It is very difficult to find sites. It's probably the most difficult thing. I'd love to get 4 more handwells or 5 more frying barnets, but it's very difficult to get that sort of stock now because, again, vendors have been far too greedy. And the second thing is you really have to look hard as to how you're going to unlock that particular site. So people can, look at a site and think, oh, this should be maybe 4-story or 5-story, and everybody has their own take on things. But understanding how to unlock value from sites now is going to be even more important now, especially with so many players in the game. So each of our sites, obviously, we deploy a different sales strategy. Our site in Hanwell, we're looking at selling off-plan. I touched on it earlier. We don't want to be greedy. The site in Fine Barnet, for example, we cannot sell off-plan. So we've got 3 houses there. We'll sell off one of the, we'll get one done as soon as possible, use that as a show home to sell the other 2. So we've got different methods that we use for each